Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we are going to fundamentally shift how you look at those incredibly frustrating, seemingly unsolvable political debates. You know the exact ones I'm talking about, right? The arguments that just go round and round in circles at the dinner table, usually right around the time the turkey is being carved, or those endless exhausting threads in online comment sections. Well, we are diving deep into the core of value pluralism today to figure out exactly why these arguments never seem to end, and why that endless friction might actually just be built right into the fabric of human nature. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to try a slightly uncomfortable thought experiment with me. Imagine every political argument you've ever had, but you magically give both sides unlimited time, completely unlimited access to every single fact and statistic in existence, and, of course, unlimited patience. Would they eventually agree? Well, the honest answer from one of the 20th century's sharpest political philosophers is a resounding no. No way. Even with infinite data, they still wouldn't agree. And here is the absolutely crucial realization. This lack of agreement, it's not because people are just too stubborn or too stupid to see the facts. It is because, for the most part, the disagreement was never really about the facts in the first place. Think about it. Most of us walk into an argument assuming the other person is just missing some key piece of information. We think, if I just show them this one right statistic, they're going to magically come around. But the core of our absolute deepest arguments is simply not rooted in factual data. To really grasp why this is, we've got to jump back to the 18th century for a second. Philosopher David Hume introduced this brilliant concept known as the fact-value gap, which is sometimes called Hume's guillotine. Basically, the principle states that you cannot logically derive a should purely from an is, meaning you can pile up facts about unemployment rates, crime statistics, or GDP growth all day long, but none of those facts purely on their own logically dictate what a society should value most. That final step, that's a values question, not a factual one. Let's fast forward to 1958 and see how this builds. That year, political philosopher Isaiah Berlin gave a lecture called Two Concepts of Liberty. And buried right inside this incredibly influential essay was an idea that took Hume's gap and pushed it into an even more radical concept. It's an idea that completely reframes how we look at human society and, honestly, our most unsolvable disagreements. Now, what is truly profound about Berlin's realization here is his view on our ultimate goals as human beings. He basically said, and I quote, "The ends people pursue are many and not all of them are, in principle, compatible with each other." He realized that human goals naturally and inevitably collide. We don't just want one good thing, we want a bunch of good things. And unfortunately, the universe just isn't designed to let us have all of them at their absolute maximum at the exact same time. Which brings us directly to the core concept of our explainer today, value pluralism. This is the theory that human values, things like liberty, equality, justice, security, tradition, are genuinely separate. They are sometimes fundamentally incompatible. And here's the kicker, they cannot be ranked by a single master formula. There's just no ultimate math equation that perfectly balances them all. And this means real conflict. And honestly, even real tragedy can never be fully engineered out of political life. So, how does this actually play out in the real world? Well, we are going to look at three classic everyday examples. You can think of these as the three great collisions. Seeing these is going to show you exactly how Berlin's theory operates in reality and why you might be completely talking past your opponents without even realizing it. First up, let's look at equality versus liberty. If you push hard toward maximum individual liberty, meaning minimal restrictions on what people can do with their own property, their labor, their choices, you tend to get significant inequality over time. Unrestricted freedom just lets natural differences in talent and luck compound. On the flip side, if you push hard toward maximum equality, redistributing wealth and outcomes to make things as even as possible, well, at some point you actually need to restrict what the more successful individuals are free to do in order to level the playing field for everyone else. So the crucial point here is this. Two people can look at the exact same tax policy data. They can agree completely on what its economic effects will be, and they can still land in entirely opposite places. Why? Because they are weighing a legitimate trade-off differently. One values the liberty side heavier, the other values the equality side heavier. Neither person is failing at logic here. They are just exhibiting value pluralism perfectly. Let's move on to our second collision, security versus freedom. If you want to maximize personal freedom, so minimal government surveillance, maximum privacy, you generally just have to accept a higher tolerance for certain risks, like harder to track threats or crime. But if you want to maximize collective security, expanding surveillance powers, and the state's ability to monitor, you inherently accept a reduction in personal privacy and individual autonomy. Just like that last example, two people can agree completely on exactly how effectively a specific surveillance program stops a threat. The data is entirely agreed upon. But that doesn't actually resolve the argument over whether that risk reduction is actually worth the loss of freedom it costs. You see, you aren't disagreeing about the facts of the trade-off, you're disagreeing about how much each side of the scale is fundamentally worth. Okay, our third collision is tradition versus progress. If you favor tradition, preserving inherited customs and established social structures, you generally get a lot of stability and a strong shared identity. But the cost is slower adaptation and some very real personal constraint for anybody who doesn't comfortably fit that mold. Conversely, if you favor progress and actively revise those customs, you get much faster adaptation and a lot more room for individuality. But you lose continuity and you risk discarding genuinely valuable embedded wisdom before you even fully understand why it worked in the first place. Once more, opponents can have the exact same foresight here. They can completely agree on what a specific social reform will physically change in society. Yet, they will disagree entirely on which value that change should ultimately serve. We constantly mistake these really profound clashes of values for simple misunderstandings of fact. And this brilliantly illustrates how we mentally handle these really heavy conflicts. Berlin actually borrowed a line from the ancient Greek poet Archilochus, who famously wrote, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing." Berlin used this metaphor to categorize the two fundamentally different ways human beings respond to the uncomfortable reality of value pluralism. Let's break down this comparison because it is fascinating. The hedgehog believes there's one master value, one big idea that resolves every single conflict if applied correctly. Pure liberty, pure equality, whatever it happens to be. And because of this, they view opponents as broken, ignorant, or just plain wrong. The fox, however, accepts that there are multiple competing, genuine values in tension. The fox views opponents not as evil or stupid, but as people who are simply weighing a very real, very painful trade-off differently. The hedgehog's mindset is incredibly satisfying and rigid. But the fox's mindset, that one is difficult, honest, and highly flexible. Now, Berlin issued a really stark warning about that hedgehog instinct. He argued that clinging to a master value is actually incredibly dangerous. When you are totally convinced your one master value has absolutely no legitimate rival, anyone who disagrees with you just ceases to be a person with different legitimate priorities. Instead, they become mere obstacles to be corrected or removed. It literally destroys empathy because you can't even fathom that their underlying priority has any legitimate worth at all. So how do we actually use this? Well, here is the practical payoff of this entire explainer: how to argue like a fox. Step 1, stop assuming the other person is just missing facts. Step 2, explicitly acknowledge the structural tension, literally name the trade-off out loud. And Step 3, locate exactly where your values actually diverge. Because when you treat arguments as value divergences rather than factual errors, you stop running in those endless frustrating circles. You stop trying to simply win with data, and you start actually trying to understand the real friction. Which brings us to a rather provocative question I want to leave you with today. Think about equality versus liberty, security versus freedom, tradition versus progress. Which fault line do you personally weigh most differently from your opponents? I challenge you to really critically reflect on your own arguments this week. Try to identify your own specific value trade-offs before you jump into the next fray. Thank you so much for exploring the core of value pluralism with me today, and definitely keep these frameworks in mind as we continue to decode the complexities of our world in our next explainer.